Hi, I'm Mark Hauser. I'm an antique skyscraper historian. I write books about America's first skyscrapers, which really brought the trend of skyscrapers to the rest of the world. And I'm working with Chris Hytha, an artist from Philadelphia, on this new collection of skyscrapers called Highrises Art Deco. You can see it online or in our book. Chris is from Philadelphia and I'm from Pittsburgh, and we both love the skyscrapers in our cities, and we want more people to appreciate them because there are a lot of great skyscrapers that aren't in New York or Chicago. My book with Chris and my earlier book, MultiStories, talk about the great skyscrapers from coast to coast in America because every one of them is worth learning more about, especially the people that built them. So I invite you to listen to the story of the Luhrs family and Luhrs Tower and the Luhrs building, great historic landmarks of Phoenix.
My name is Erin Lindsay. I'm the president of the Phoenix Art Deco Society. If you do not know who we are, I'm here to fix that. We've been around for a few years now. We're a 501c3. Our main mission is to preserve, educate, and celebrate all things Art Deco, 1920s, 1930s, specifically in Phoenix and also around the world. So it's doing things like this for the community to learn, about our beautiful architecture, whether it's the Luhrs Tower or something like the Eastern Columbia building right next to us in LA. So when I first discovered this work, I was on a Zoom session, and the New York Art Deco Society had brought over this beautiful exhibit, and Mark Hauser was one of the presenters with artist Chris Hytha, and I was just, when you see these pieces, it's just beautiful. You don't get to see these buildings like that. And I was like, that's it. I need to have this in Phoenix. I need to do it right now. So it was so great that we were able to be with the, partner with the property managers here who let us even do it in this building. That's a little unique. So it's nice to see the lobby and just experience this building as if it were back in 1920s, 1930s. So if you have any questions about the Art Deco Society, you can ask me. We do things, usually once a month, every other month, just to get everybody involved in the arts and the culture. And I'll pass it off to Mark Hauser, who is a skilled and detailed researcher and historian, written a couple books, including the coffee table book you've seen back there, Highrises, and all the placards that you see here, that's all him. So we're really happy to have you here, and I will just let you take it away, Mark.
Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you. Thanks to the Phoenix Art Deco Society, too. Thank you for putting together this wonderful exhibition. I've been traveling all around the country talking about America's first skyscrapers and our Art Deco skyscrapers, and this really doesn't just compete with, but outdoes several of the exhibitions that I've seen. So you deserve to be congratulated for putting together such a great exhibition. So thank you, Erin, and thank you to the Society. And thanks to all of you for coming today. So I like to talk about America's antique skyscrapers, and this is an odd title, Antique Skyscrapers, I suppose. But if you think about it, the building that we're standing in right now is about to have its 100th birthday. So this building is an antique skyscraper. And whenever I talk about antique skyscrapers, I'd like to first ask people to try and roll back in your mind to a time when there were no skyscrapers. So try to imagine Phoenix without any skyscrapers. I'll try to speak up. I don't want to make this make noise either. So try to imagine a time when Phoenix had no skyscrapers, because there was a time when it didn't, and it's hard for us to imagine it now. But there was a time, there were people who saw the first skyscrapers go up, not just in Phoenix, but everywhere across America. And these, though they may read to our eyes today as old buildings, as antique skyscrapers, they actually are marvelous technological advancements that radically changed all of our cities. There was the invention of two key things that made skyscrapers possible. One is elevators, because without them there's no point in having a building with an 18th floor, if no one will ever go there. The other is, from my hometown of Pittsburgh, steel. So in order to make skyscrapers, To make a tall building, you either have to have the walls hold it up or something else hold it up. If the walls are holding up the building, then that means that the ground floor, which should be the most lucrative floor for stores and restaurants, it won't have any room for shop windows because it'll have these huge fortress-like walls to hold up a building like this that's 14 stories tall. So the invention of a steel cage framework for skyscrapers, which comes about in Chicago and New York in the 1870s and 1880s, makes it possible to make tall buildings where the walls don't hold it up. And so you can have big windows, and the walls are just keeping the rain off of everyone's desks. Or in Phoenix, the sand off of everyone's desk. So let's talk a little bit about Phoenix's first skyscraper, the family that brought it here, the pioneering families, the Luhrs. So this is the Luhrs legacy. I like to think of skyscrapers as legacies too. They are legacies made of stone and steel. And the people that brought them about are, I think, often as interesting or more interesting than the buildings themselves. Because when you go down your neighborhood street and you look at the houses that are near your own, I think your eye is drawn to the buildings, the houses rather, of the people that you know, the stories that you know. Those buildings then can take on a special meaning and a life of their own because you know about who were the people that put them there. And it adds meaning. So I hope to do that for you today by adding some meaning to the skyscrapers we see. So this postcard here of the Luhrs skyscrapers is from 1940. So when this postcard, which is very vintage, you can tell by the cars, when it was made, skyscrapers had been around for 50 years already. But these buildings were very significant here because they were a brand new development in Phoenix. And even a decade plus after they arose, people were quite proud of them. And that's why they're on this postcard. Let's look at Phoenix in 1885. This is a wonderful illustrated map I found in the Library of Congress that shows you that for someone who speaks about skyscrapers, I might have picked the wrong city. Because in 1885, there clearly are no skyscrapers, so maybe we have to jump somewhere else. I'm going to jump to Chicago. And I mentioned to you that Chicago was, in the 1880s, a place where skyscrapers were first developed. And so this is a Chicago Tribune story from 1891. The first skyscraper is often credited as the Home Insurance Building in Chicago, which opened in 1885, the same year that that map of Phoenix was produced. And it was a building that had a mixture of steel and iron framework in it. But shortly after that, many more skyscrapers arose, and many of them were done by this architect of Chicago named Daniel Burnham. There's a wonderful article here from 1891 that says, Chicago's big buildings, one of the many things with which we beat the world. And the writer claims that in New York City, they won't dispute that Chicago is the home of skyscrapers, which is wishful thinking, but they call it the Windy City for a reason. The tallest skyscrapers, many of the ones you see in those illustrations in 1891, are by Daniel Burnham, who was so good at skyscrapers and so famous that they had him become the man in charge of the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. And that's an illustration of the World's Fair, which had no skyscrapers, but had some tall things. First of all, right there in the center is the largest building in the world at the time. So the World's Fair was called the White City. The reason is that after Daniel Burnham, as the boss, brought together all of America's great architects to design this temporary exhibition city, they tried to decide what it would look like. And one of the first things they decided was, if we make it just all white, then that's easy to decide with paint. It'll make painting easier. So they made all of these temporary buildings, which are mostly plaster on the outside and then steel framework. They painted them all white, and they also agreed to make them all uniform cornice height, all the major buildings. These are the greatest architects in New York, Chicago, and elsewhere, gathered together, each getting one building to design. And the cornice levels were all universal, and they all based their design on the place where most of them had been trained, which was the Paris School of Fine Arts, which in French is École des Beaux-Arts. And that is why the style of this architecture was known as Beaux-Arts, and it became the language of big buildings for decades after this great World's Fair, which was massively popular, due in part to this great attraction that, as a Pittsburgher, I'm very proud of, the Ferris wheel, because it was a Pittsburgh bridge engineer named Gale Ferris who came up with the idea for a giant revolving sightseeing wheel with train cars basically on it. Each of those cars could fit 30 plus people. This was an effort to outdo the Eiffel Tower of the French World's Fair, the one in Paris a couple of years earlier. Just to get an idea of the size of these buildings, look at the people on the roof of that main building. And keep in mind, these are all temporary constructions. But you can see the style of building there. It's a mix of classical and Renaissance. And it would, as I said, influence architecture in America for decades to come. In fact, if you think about a building right here on Jefferson Street, you'll see similarities between its design and the design of this building, thanks to Daniel Burnham and the World's Fair. Now, New York is not going to agree that Chicago is the place where skyscrapers were invented. This is a picture from 1875 that shows the first 10-story office building, and that is the Western Union building. It's being constructed right there. It has elevators, it's a high-tech company, it's telegraphs, and one great feature that it had, it's right there on Broadway. We're looking south towards the Battery, down Broadway. And one feature that it had was, because it was telegraphs, it was connected to the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., and it had a clock on the roof. And people could set their watch by the clock because it was the most accurate time. And in order that you could set your pocket watch, they had a special feature, a spire above the clock with a ball on it. And every day at noon, the ball would drop so that when it reached the bottom, you knew it's noon and set your pocket watch. And that tradition is still with us today, though many New Yorkers don't know about the origins, let alone other folks. So that's the first 10-story office building in America, 1870. Now let's jump ahead a little bit. This is about 1900. So on the left there, you see the first 20-story office building in the world. That's Joseph Pulitzer's World Building, the headquarters of the New York World. And then by 1899, the next tallest office building, the Park Building, also near Newspaper Row and Broadway. And then this is 1908, the Singer Building, the new tallest skyscraper in the world. So they were just popping up like dandelions in New York. That's 1913's tallest building in the world, the Woolworth Building, which was named the Cathedral of Commerce because it had a Gothic design. Things were going up so fast that, this is the New York Times, 1911, are American cities going mad architecturally? And the man who says this, I have to read some of his quote. I am opposed to skyscrapers. I think it was a great mistake to ever have allowed them to be built, says the architect of the Singer Building. At the time, the tallest skyscraper in the world. He says they disfigure the city, shut out the light, they dwarf into insignificance all the other buildings of the town. I regard the whole thing as an ill-advised experiment which could only have been carried out in a place where public taste was at a low ebb and where dollars outweighed all aesthetic considerations. I think that it's part sour grapes because he now knows that the Woolworth Building is going to be taller than his world's tallest skyscraper. But that's Ernest Flagg, skyscraper architect turned critic. But he's not wrong about American cities seemingly going mad architecturally. This is my hometown of Pittsburgh. I have to say, as a Pittsburgher, I've long thought that we have great skyscrapers and no one knows about them except Pittsburghers. And so in this project with Chris Hytha, who's from Philadelphia, the Highrises project, the art that you see here in the gallery, we're partly driven by this idea that America's full of wonderful skyscrapers that more people should know about and appreciate. But anyway, here's Pittsburgh in 1900, and I'll point out our two skyscrapers. This is the Carnegie building, Andrew Carnegie's steel company, our first more than 10-story building. And then over here is the Park building, which is also a steel company in Pittsburgh. And this is our brand new courthouse with its giant tower. So I'm just gonna quickly highlight them so that you can keep an eye on them. That's 1900. Here's 1910 Pittsburgh. American cities were going mad architecturally. These skyscrapers were popping up faster than you could keep track. And the people that are seeing this happen are also people that are seeing the invention of a car and of an airplane. They're seeing the first cars and airplanes, and their cities are changing right before their eyes. So let's have some sympathy for those folks. Out in San Francisco, for example, Daniel Burnham of the World's Fair in 1889 builds the first skyscraper there. That's also a newspaper skyscraper, so is this one. Newspapers, it pains me as a former newspaper reporter to recall or know about a time when newspapers were so lucrative that people would build skyscrapers from the profits they made. Oh well, a different era. But I show you San Francisco because it is this city where a young 20-year-old German immigrant named Georg Luhrs eventually makes his way after sailing across the ocean, leaving his native Germany to seek his fortune in the United States. There's Georg on the left-hand side. As I said, 20-year-old, he was a wheelwright. A wheelwright being someone who knew how to make wheels and had a wagon shop. His father was a wheelwright. His grandfather was a wheelwright. His great-grandfather was, he's a fifth generation at least wheelwright from Hanover in Germany, from a small town there. And he comes out here to seek his fortune, and that job is so lucrative, by the way, that as soon as his boat lands in Philadelphia, young Georg has a job offer. If you come out to San Francisco, to the West Coast, into the Sierras where the gold mines are, we need wagon makers, so we'll pay your passage. So he got paid passage, came out by boat, crossed the Panama Isthmus on Burro, or jumped on another boat, came up the coast, and went straight to the Sierras, to the gold mines. But this is 1867, so it's pre-skyscraper, but also post-gold rush. And things are kind of played out there. So he learns English, but quickly decides he's going to find more fruitful territory. So he and some other fellows come out to Nevada, and then after that decide that's not working out either. So they come down to Wickenburg. The big gold rush is on now in Wickenburg, northwest of where you are now, of course. You guys know Arizona better than I, so you'll know. But anyway, there was something called the Vulture Mine. And he went to the Vulture Mine and became the head wagon maker there. And most of the details about the Luhrs family comes from the extensive, unedited memoirs of Georg's youngest son. So there's some great detail in that. One of the pieces of information I found particularly compelling is that the superintendent of the mine's son was missing. And when they finally found him, he had 40 arrows in him. So it was still a time when the new settlers' presence on the land was, let's say, contested. But anyway, Georg opened a wagon shop in Wickenburg after working in the mine for a while, and but eventually moves out to Phoenix in 1879. So let's come back here to this Phoenix map. He met up with a blacksmith, and the two of them decided to open a wagon shop. The blacksmith's name is Newell Herrick. And you can actually see the blacksmith shop in this map. If we zoom in, I'll show you. First of all, you can see center. This is before the streets were first, second, third. But Jefferson's right here, and there's center. And there's the blacksmith shop. It's drawn in that map. And in fact, better yet, there it is. That's looking at it from Jefferson. I suspect that must be Georg and Newell standing in front of it. In fact, this went so well for them, this shop that they opened in 1879, that they needed to expand operations. So they bought the entire block cat-a-corner from the shop and opened a corral and livery stable right there. Picture of that too. It's the Commercial Corral and Livery Stable. And in fact, they had some expanded operations, another wagon shop, got bigger and bigger. And they also added one other thing. They bought the whole block, as I said, so they built a house there. And house is important because Georg, I think 1884, goes back to Germany and meets a sweet girl back there in his hometown, and brings her back. So the Georg and Gretchen moved into the house. Also, Georg and Newell bought up the entire quarter block where their shop was. And soon after that, they're such good carpenters and construction and iron, the iron that he's forging, that the neighbor there, the client, asked them to build them a 2-story hotel. So Georg and Newell built them a hotel right there. You can even see the hotel. Here's the thing, the client then died, and the two men decided, I guess we should get into the hotel business. One of the reasons they wanted to is they heard the Southern Pacific Railroad was on the way. So they wanted to make sure they took advantage of the increasing number of people coming. Of course, Phoenix was now a growing city, rapidly growing, and would soon become the capital of the territory. So they expanded. They built the commercial hotel. You can see the original hotel right there. And this big 3-story hotel that they built, which was the tallest, it's claimed by Georg's son, George Jr., that this was the tallest building, certainly in Phoenix at the time, but perhaps in the entire Arizona territory. I'm not sure exactly how to find out if there were any other 3-story buildings in 1888 in all of Arizona, but let's take him at his word. Now, once it opened, they found quickly they needed to add another feature: balconies. There was no air conditioning, so people would sleep on the balconies because the houses, or the rooms would get too hot. So the problem is you'd have to put mosquito netting over people, and if there were sandstorms, et cetera, et cetera. But it stayed looking like that for many years. This is a letterhead from 1920 of their property. And soon after, they had a small fire, and so they remodeled the entire thing, but took over the entire block, made the 2-story thing next door into a 3-story, and there you have it. What eventually became known as the Luhrs Hotel, or rather the Hotel Luhrs. And here is Georg Luhrs, the prosperous hotelier. He gets out of the carriage-making business and throws all his time and effort into the hotel. And here is there's a couple employees and his oldest son, Arthur. Let me tell you about Arthur. Arthur would stay in that hotel for the rest of his life. Arthur Luhrs went to Stanford, studied mining, then got sick, came back and got into the family business and became the hotel manager. And I like him for one particular reason, is he sports a mean bow tie. So that's Arthur. Arthur and his, after 2 girls were born, Emma and Ella, the baby of the family was born. The 3 older ones were all born in the house, but George Jr. here was born in the hotel. And he liked to dress up in costumes, whether cowboy or Indian, or that's him in his band uniform. He played clarinet, and then he played violin so well he started giving lessons as a kid to make money. He also sold lemonade outside of the hotel. The costumes might be due to his folks, because in 1901, President McKinley was the first U.S. president to visit a territory while in office, and they dressed up little George Jr. in Uncle Sam costume. And apparently, George always remembers that President McKinley, who was staying at the hotel, saw him and put him in his lap on the reviewing stand. So little George got to sit in the lap of President McKinley when he visited Phoenix. As I said, he was a talented musical person. In fact, he won a statewide, or territory-wide, I guess. No, statewide. It was 1914. So right after statehood, George won a statewide high school singing contest. And this is him on the Glee Club at Stanford, where he studied and then went to law school. He was the president of the Glee Club. He was the head cheerleader at Stanford. And then in 1918, having graduated with the U.S. in World War I, he joined the Army and went to officer training school, but he was released because the war ended in 1918, so he didn't serve any longer than that. And he was going to go into the law business and actually did start as a lawyer, but then his dad needed his help because his father had a dream now. So Georg wanted to build the first skyscraper in Phoenix. He wanted to build a big hotel or office building or something. So he brought a German immigrant from El Paso named Henry Trost, who had done a lot of work in El Paso in the Southwest. He was from Ohio, but he came out here. And that's them in front of the hotel. And Trost designed what would be the first 10-story building in all of Arizona. So the first skyscraper. When I say skyscraper, I mean how tall it needs to be is kind of subjective, but 10 stories is certainly a good cutoff point. And so to imagine a time in Phoenix where there was no skyscraper 10 stories tall, to be the first one to have one, well, that was a pretty big achievement for this German immigrant who started out in the carriage trade. So there it is, and it's a beautiful building, and it's also, if you notice, this opened in 1924, right next door to where we are now, and it looks a lot like the buildings from that Chicago World's Fair. So those, even though it's 30 years after the Chicago World's Fair, it's still using a lot of the architectural language of the World's Fair. But of course, underneath it, I mentioned before, is steel. So I like this 1924 ad by the structural steel company that put the cage that the building is hanging from, and this big muscular steel worker here, welding or riveting. I'm not sure. Does anyone know? Is that welding or riveting? Riveting. Okay, folks know. I should know which one's a weld and what's a rivet. But it was a big deal, as I said. It was major coverage here in the Arizona Republican. The Luhrs building is a monument to the pioneer of the valley. You can see story after story here. The lighthouse of Phoenix prosperity. I mean, it was such a big deal. It made it onto the second page. Design and ornamentation and architecture beautifies Phoenix. And it made the third page too. And page 4. And page 5. And pages 6 and 7. This is like just people all congratulate. Oh, I should say page 8 and page 9 and page 10. So quite a few pages. Oh, I'm sorry, 11 as well. George Luhrs' faith in the future of the city is shown by his lofty addition to the Phoenix. Well, we're running out of space here on this display screen. But just to give you an idea, here is a look from the top. Let's go in a time machine, zoom back, set it 101 years back, and here is us on this block on the top of the Luhrs building, and here was what they could see. The Hurd building, the older tallest building, 7 stories, the Arizona Republic there. And the Hurd Museum, I've got to check it out later. St. Mary's. I think the school over here is the, let's find it. There it is, the Children's Museum, right? So that was the view from the top of the building, the tallest building in all of Arizona in 1924. So what was George's job? Well, the young lawyer, he was the one getting out there. They didn't have a pile of money. They had to borrow the money to build the skyscraper. And in order to do that, they had to convince the financiers that they had tenants. So what George first did was he went to the Arizona Club, which wanted to expand this private business men's club, and got them to commit to the top 4 floors. So there was a lounge on 9, there was banquet rooms on 10, and there was private rooms on 7 and 8. That's the lounge. He got them to commit to leasing. This is Standard Oil Company. They committed to take a whole floor on 6. And then he went around to, I think he went to St. Louis, Chicago, Los Angeles, trying to find a bank that would cover the costs of building the skyscraper. He didn't get anywhere, so we finally had to find a private bond issuing company in San Francisco in order to put the bonds out to raise the money to build this building. But it was a huge success. It filled up. And so soon after that, the family started thinking about expanding. And the initial plan that Mr. Trost back in El Paso came up with was, what if you just took this one and made another one and an even bigger one in the middle? Unfortunately, that was too pricey of a plan. And also, Mr. Trost said, it's the 20s. It's the roaring 20s, everybody. And we're not making skyscrapers that look this way anymore. We have Art Deco now. So let's make an Art Deco looking skyscraper. One that looks like something that could be in New York or Chicago. And so they did. Trost, the same guy, Henry, 5 years later, they started construction of the Luhrs Tower. You can see it there. I promise I'm not going to show you 11 more front pages. It was not as much of a big deal anymore. This was not ever the tallest building in Phoenix, although I've seen it described as such. But the Westford Ho building was built just before and is taller than the Luhrs Tower that we're in today. Nevertheless, it was a big day. There is mom and dad, Georg and Gretchen, with the shovels, and their kids, Ella and Arthur, the tall one, and Emma and George. They're right here where their house used to be. Now, they had moved out of the house, they moved into the hotel many years before, but it had become a barbecue stand apparently. But anyway, they had the proud moment of groundbreaking right there where they had where Georg and Gretchen had raised their family. And behind them you can see the brand new courthouse that you can see from the windows here that had just gone up. And this is Georg at his 81st birthday party. Next to him is his granddaughter, Jean. That's his last birthday cake, unfortunately. He passed away before the construction of this building was completed. But a fun side note is Jean later helps to put together the memoirs. Finally, it was open. The beautiful Luhrs Tower. As you can see, it was a beautiful structure that greatly enhanced the changing skyline of El Paso, Texas. Oh, I've tricked you. So Henry Trost loved his design so much that he also built another skyscraper in El Paso that looks very much like the Luhrs Tower, and opened basically within a year of this one opening. It's 1 floor taller. That's the beautiful Luhrs building. Souvenir postcard on the left, and on the right is our image from Highrises Art Deco and the Highrises Collection project. If you zoom in, because the Highrises art is super high resolution, you'll see these heads on top. The significance of them is a bit of a mystery, but it is suggested that they are supposed to represent Spanish conquistadors or explorers. That's something that Trost liked so much that he put some of them on his building in El Paso. So that's the entrance to the El Paso one. And the National Register of Historic Places says that this one here with the mustache is Trost himself, which I think is pretty bold. I would have thought it would be Bassett, but I haven't seen a picture of Bassett, so I can't say. At any rate, the way that Chris makes these images is by using a drone. So this is Chris and me on top of the Carbide and Carbon building on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And he's the one not in the bow tie. But that's Chris shooting it from his drone, so he's secretly controlling a drone to take this picture. But what he does is he flies his drone up the side of the buildings, and at each floor, he takes a picture. And then he takes all those pictures back to his studio and cuts them out and stitches them together. And that is why the look seems to lack perspective, because Chris is trained as an architect. He went to architecture school in Philadelphia. And so he wants his images to look like an elevation drawing rather than a photograph. So photographic level of detail, but the perspective is the vanishing points have gone away, and instead what you have is what looks like a square two-dimensional drawing of the building. But it allows you to get a level of detail and see things that you couldn't otherwise see, and appreciate some of the amazing details, like the golden top of this skyscraper, the Carbide and Carbon, that we like so much that we put it on the cover of our book. In fact, Chris likes it so much he made a model of it. He got his architecture degree during COVID, so he didn't get the chance of the opportunity to do the design or building project that a lot of architecture students get to do. So he missed it. So he made this by hand on his own from his drone pictures. He bought a 3D printer and learned how to operate it, and out of carved wood and 3D plastic, he made this model. You can see the image behind. But he and I spent about 2 years traveling the country, visiting hundreds of great skyscrapers from the Art Deco era and before. My job is mostly with a pen and with my phone camera to get details. His job is, that's a drone he's piloting up the side of the Fauché Tower in Minneapolis. This was our trip in the upper Midwest. and he's shooting some detailed pictures on a church skyscraper in Chicago, the Chicago Temple. But we've been fortunate to have this, our project exhibited all across the country. So this is in the Chicago Architecture Center. We were a major exhibit there last year for many months. This is the New York Art Deco Society in the General Society's Historic Library in Midtown Manhattan. That's another Art Deco building in Detroit, the Guardian Building, which has got one of the most spectacular, colorful Art Deco interiors in the country. And this was recently, that's not me, by the way, no bow tie. But that was last month in Los Angeles. There was a gala celebrating the 100th anniversary of Art Deco, like this excellent exhibit is. And so that is someone singing Edith Piaf's French 1920s music and some of the images of Los Angeles skyscrapers. You'll see one of them here, the Blue Eastern Building, made of blue terracotta. Los Angeles had height limits, so their skyscrapers are short, but they're really vivid. The height limits were because Los Angeles, the city fathers wanted to make sure that everyone on the sidewalk got plenty of sun, because that was their main selling point. So the only tall building in Los Angeles for many years was the City Hall, because it was exempt from this height limit rule. San Francisco, on the other hand, with all the earthquakes, built tons of skyscrapers in the Art Deco era, and none of them fell down. You can see all of these skyscrapers, including this wonderful Phoenix one, on Chris and my website, highrisescollection.com. Now that has 200 skyscrapers from coast to coast, New York, Chicago for sure, but also Phoenix, also Pittsburgh, also Philadelphia, even little places like Lincoln, Nebraska. You'll see here in this exhibition, one of the great Art Deco skyscrapers is a state capitol building in Nebraska. So I invite you to go check out highrisescollection.com. And when you're there, you can also pick up prints, and there's even phone screens. I have one on my own phone. This is, you'll see in the exhibit here, but this is Buffalo City Hall, my favorite Art Deco building in all of America. Not only in the outside, but the inside looks like it's a Batman villain's lair with the murals and these spooky, strangely lit warrior sculptures that are very, very interesting. But anyway, enough about all that stuff. Let me talk again about your wonderful skyscrapers right here on this block. Of course, the Luhrs Tower is part of our Art Deco book and our project. The Luhrs building is part of my first book, MultiStories. And that's because, as I said earlier, I think there's more to buildings than just the architecture. I think the stories of the people who were in them make those buildings come to life even more. I've told you a lot about the Luhrs, but there were others in these buildings. One of them was the Prohibition enforcers, the Treasury Department. You may have heard that in the Luhrs building, that is where the Treasury agents were, and so they were the ones raiding speakeasies, and when they'd get a cache of whiskey, they would dump it down the drain in the basement of the Luhrs building. And it is said that the manager of the building, when he was tipped off that a big bunch of barrels were coming in, he'd really clean out the sump tank well. And then later on, when everyone went home after work, he would pump that liquor back out and resell it. It is also the case that once the Luhrs Tower went up, the Prohibition offices moved all their records here. So Prohibition was in both of these buildings. And it wasn't just the government anti-mob that was here. The mob was here too. So folks maybe recognize Gus Greenbaum, a major mob figure. He came from Chicago and came out here and had an office in this building. I'm trying to remember the name of his thing. It was the Trans-America Publishing and News Service. What it was the wire service collecting the results from all the horse races so that the bookies would have the odds. So he started out with gambling with an office in this building. And in fact, it was known, he and his brothers who were out here were hauled into court 3 different times. They were convicted twice, but the convictions were overturned on appeal because the mob has good lawyers. The third one was a hung jury. But anyway, Gus, you may know, was eventually recruited. He was so good at this gambling operation here that they brought him to Las Vegas after Bugsy Siegel was killed. And his job was to take over the Flamingo Hotel, one of the big gambling operations out there, which he ran successfully but got a little tired of it, didn't love mob life, tried to retire back here in Phoenix. It's hard to, if you've not watched a mob movie, it's hard to retire from the mob. So they pulled him back in. He was back out there for a few years, but eventually came back to Phoenix again and met a sad end in bed with his wife. Both of them were killed by, who knows, it's not been solved, I think, but clearly a mob slaying. Anyway, so I think it's kind of interesting to know about also the people who were in the buildings beyond the people that built them. But I still think the people that built them have the best stories. And sometimes the stories have other interesting angles. So here's one that I want to talk about. I said that the memoirs by George are the source of a lot of the information. They're unedited. So George wrote his memoirs at the end of his life with the aid of his granddaughter. So all the other Luhrs kids got married, but George never did. And throughout his 500-page unedited memoirs, he mentions many times that he just never had time for the ladies because he was very busy with his work, and in some cases he was married to the business, married to the properties. Now, I have some thoughts, and I want to say, first of all, that that's the age that George was managing properties and a leading citizen of Phoenix was a time when it was illegal to be gay. I have lots of friends who are gay, and my wife Diane, who's here, and I are proud of our daughter, who's a proud out butch lesbian. So I mean this only as a compliment and an interesting thought rather than scandalous. But I suspect very strongly that George was gay. And part of the reason is he mentions a couple of his girlfriends, but very briefly. One of them was his co-star in the High School Musical, and another one was a girl he knew in first grade that he got back in touch with, and she would play the piano for him while he would sing. And then she said to him, "George, why are you not married?" And he said, "Well, you got married, how could I get married?" And that's about it with the girlfriends in the story. But there are many, many, many stories about his friends in Glee Club and Stanford. And there's a particular one named Myron that he goes on for pages and pages and pages about. Myron and George met at Stanford in the Glee Club. Myron played piano in a private club, or a resort rather, in the mountains in California. George, several summers, went up and spent a week with him while he played at the club. They decided that they wanted to go on a a cross-country tour together. So as soon as George got his JD degree, and Myron was, I think, 21 at the time, a couple years behind George at school, they went on this train trip, and they started in Los Angeles. They went to back through Phoenix all the way to New Orleans, then up to DC, then up to New York, where they went and saw many, many Broadway shows and a Yankees game, then up the Hudson River, Quebec, Montreal, Toronto, Detroit, Chicago. They did the whole loop, all the way out to Victoria, Seattle, and back down the coast. And then the next year they went on a camping trip all the way up and back down the West Coast. The two of them remained very close for the rest of their lives. And I say, these are stories that I don't often come across when I'm doing my research. Because, as I said, you couldn't really be a successful business person and be openly gay. So we don't know for sure. And there's some, this is conjecture on my part. But there are a couple stories that have arisen in my research, and I like to share these stories because these are stories that people today might be inspired by. And it would be nice if we could know for sure one way or the other. But at any rate, I want to share that with you. And finally, I want you to know that George did not have to live his life alone. And that is because of his sister Ella. So that's Ella there at a young age. Ella got married in 1917, and her husband was a printer. And just before their 20th wedding anniversary, he fell down an elevator shaft on one of the Luhrs properties and died. So Ella moved into the hotel with her brother George, and they lived together for the next 40 years. And in fact, I mean, they were quite close. They had dinner together at the private Arizona club. They were members. They had shared the same bedroom, and George discovered her after a nap one day in 1974 in her bed. She passed away in her sleep. The other sister had already passed away. That's Arthur there still, so it was just George and Arthur now in the family Luhrs Hotel. Arthur's still manager, still rocking the bow tie. But Arthur passed away about 6 months after sister Ella did. So now George was all alone. And so the last years of his life, he moved back in with that niece, the granddaughter of Georg that we saw in the birthday picture. And she helped him put together his memoirs. He also collected all the family papers and all of the photographs that he had, donated them to the Arizona State University. And one thing that he did live to see and regret is that he finally paid off all the mortgages in 1968. But the commercial hotel, the Hotel Luhrs, he did sell in the 70s after all his siblings had passed away, and the new owner decided to demolish it. So after he saw his family hotel where he had been born torn down, he said, "Older cities do everything they can to save and retain their old buildings. Newer cities wake up when it's too late." So he outlived his dad. He made it to almost 90 years old. He died in, I think, 1984. But Phoenix did wake up and did preserve the beautiful buildings that the Luhrs family contributed to your skyline. And there they are in all their glory today. As you probably know, the Luhrs building is now recently completely remodeled into a boutique hotel called the Moxie. And also on the ground floor, when I was last here with Diane and with our kids, we visited the Bitter and Twisted, the really great cocktail bar in the ground floor of the Luhrs building. And the Luhrs Tower, well, it speaks for itself. We're in it right now. So I think that, in conclusion, if I can leave you with the thought, it's that when you look at these buildings in your city or other cities that you visit, you should think more, in addition to the buildings themselves, think about the people behind them. Think about the challenges they faced and the perseverance that they showed in order to get their buildings built in the first place. I hope I've conveyed that to you, and I hope that when you look at the buildings, it makes you think of what I've taken as my motto, which is to keep looking up. So thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Please comment so we can hear your thoughts. If you would like to purchase this book, the website is highrisescollection.com. This was brought to you by Phoenix Art Care. They make canvas prints and frames for your artwork. They also specialize in shipping artwork.